In this lesson, we will cover adjusting duct settings and adjusting pipe settings. This project was created using the default mechanical template. I've placed a few duct and pipe components so we can see how some of the mechanical settings work. To access the mechanical settings, switch to the Systems ribbon. On the HVAC panel, in the Mechanical panel, and in the Plumbing and Piping panel, there's a dialog box launcher that will open the Mechanical Settings dialog. To begin, there are hidden line settings that will control the hidden lines for duct and piping. Then there are duct settings and pipe settings. And there are several that are similar, and we'll kind of group those together and make this go a little quicker. For duct settings and pipe settings, the first options here are use annotation scale for single line fittings, and when this option is selected, then the fittings will use the pipe fitting annotation size or the duct fitting annotation size. So currently it's set to 1/8 of an inch, and I'll click OK and we'll take a look at an existing elbow that's here. And so the fittings also have an instance parameter called use annotation scale. So back to the mechanical settings dialog, when this first option is selected, then that instance parameter for the fittings will be enabled. When it's deselected, if I create a new fitting, then it will not be selected. So I'll select it and you can see that that's disabled. And so if I select this or deselect this, it does not affect existing fittings. It just affects those that are placed, and whatever that option is what that instance parameter will be. For those that do have use annotation scale selected, you can then adjust the pipe fitting annotation size or duct if you're dealing with duct, and it will affect it for those that have that instance parameter selected. So in case you have extremely large fittings, if you're seeing that in your model, then this is where these are the parameters you're going to want to take a look at. Okay, moving on. There are a lot of prefixes and suffixes and symbols that you can adjust for things like the pipe size prefix and suffix. And then if I switch back to the duct settings, you can see some similar settings there as well. So for example, here, if I go back here, I have a pipe size tag that has the round symbol placed, and so that is coming from the pipe size suffix. And once again, there are several of those. Back in the duct settings, you can see that there is an air density and an air dynamic viscosity, and so those are obviously different from what's in the pipe settings because in duct we're dealing with airflow through there. And so the air density is used to determine duct sizing and pressure drop, whereas the air dynamic viscosity is used in determining duct sizing when you use the duct sizing tool. And then once again, several prefixes and suffixes. All right, continuing on, you can adjust the angles. You can either choose to use any angle that the fittings will work for the fittings, or you can set specific increments right here in the mechanical settings, or you can choose to use specific angles, and then you can choose whether or not there's a predefined list of angles here, and you can choose which one of those you want to use. Same thing for pipe fittings there. The conversion settings, these are for the auto layout tools, and you can adjust this for the system classifications, and similarly for piping, you can control the main and branch routings, and you can control the pipe type and then the middle elevation. And so that's if you're going to be using the auto layout tool. Next, you can control the sizes, and so that's under duct settings. There's sizes for rectangular, oval, and round, and then under pipe settings you can control segments and sizes. Now for pipe settings, the segments and sizes, the segments are used for pipe types, and so that's where you will see those. A couple notes here. the used and size list, that controls when you're using that tool what displays in the dropdown. For example, we'll look at rectangular duct here. I will deselect a couple of these 1/2 inch options here and then click OK. And now when I activate the duct tool and I scroll up here, you can see that those 1/2 inch sizes are not available. So once again, if these are selected, it will appear in the sizes list. And if they're not selected, then they will not, as we just saw. And that works for all the ducts and then for all the pipe segments and sizes as well. The used and sizing, this once again is for the auto layout tools. All right, moving right along here. Actually, before we do that, let's touch on, in addition to the pipe segments and sizes, you can control the fluids. And so this also affects sizing, and you can control the fluid that is flowing through the piping, obviously, and you can control the temperature, dynamic viscosity, and density. And then also for piping, you can control the slopes. And so when you route piping, you can slope that piping, and the slope values will come from this dialog. Wrapping up here, there are calculation settings. And so for the duct settings, you can control the calculation method used for pressure drop. There's a few options available. And then for piping, there's a few tabs here. And so to begin, on the Hydronic Networks tab, you can choose whether or not to enable analysis for closed-loop hydronic piping networks. And so for a little more information on what that does, there's a detailed explanation here in this dialog. And then you can control the pressure drop calculation method on the pressure drop tab, and then on the flow tab, you can select, well, by default there's just one option, the plumbing fixture flow, but there are ways to add additional calculation methods, and that's beyond the scope of this lesson.